user experience expert, and he's going to tell you all about himself and his talk. All right, so without further ado, it's on to Everett.
Very good. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for your patience. I'm the last one today, so after this, you're more or less dismissed. But I'd like to welcome you to Beyond Sketching Features, UI Design as Natural, Intuitive Human Conversations. So I'd just like to introduce myself a little bit more. So my company is UX Design Edge, and what I do is I offer UX design training and consulting services to software development teams that don't have sufficient design talent. As it happens, that's pretty much everybody, so business is good. But before I started my company 5 years ago, I was a program manager at Microsoft, where I was responsible first for security UI on the Windows Server team. Then I later moved on to the Windows Client team, where I was personally responsible for writing and driving the Windows User Experience Guidelines, which was a fantastic experience for me. So I worked on the guidelines for Windows Vista and Windows 7. In case it matters to anybody, I did not work on the guidelines for Windows 8. So can't explain it. I have no idea what they were doing. Don't ask me. So as it happens, I have a new book called UI is Communication, and I'm mentioning that to you for 3 reasons. The first one is it's wonderful. It's a great book to get started in UX design, or if you're more advanced and want to look at UX design from a different perspective. It's also kind of the core for a lot of what I'm presenting today, but the most important reason is that I'm going to be giving away 2 copies at the end, 2 signed copies at the end, for people who correctly answered 2 trivia questions. So you want to pay attention and hopefully win a book at the end. So the reason I decided to give this particular talk is that I actually gave a workshop with the very same name at ISA 14 in Buenos Aires last year, and it's really one of the best workshops I've ever done. I was very, very pleased by how well it went. In fact, I had 3 very experienced designers afterwards tell me that the workshop really kind of changed their perspective about what their job was and how they wanted to be a designer in the future. And I thought, well, that's about as good as feedback as you could possibly get. So the good news is I want to give you the same, more or less same material. The bad news, that was a 7-hour workshop. I've got 45 minutes, so I'm really going to have to boil the message down to the most important information here. So what I'd like to do is just give you a story to kind of explain what it is I'm after, to kind of illustrate the concept here. I want to talk a little bit about sketching and what I think some of the challenges are with sketching. I want to talk about how we can think about UI design as a form of human conversation, and then look at some examples of applying that, and then present basically a communication-focused design process to kind of see how we can put all these things together and do our jobs a little bit better. And then finally, I guess we'll do the QA afterwards, so we'll skip that part. So I'd just like to, before getting started, just point out my core beliefs about UX design, which is I believe a user interface is ultimately a form of human communication. What we're doing when we do a UI is we're figuring out how to communicate to users. I think that's a very important perspective that we tend to overlook. I think that top scenarios and human communication should drive the design process. If we make decisions based on these things, it's going to give us a lot of clarity and insight. And by doing so, it's going to remove a lot of the mystique and subjectivity and art from the design process. So it's going to make it easier for us to figure out what to do. So to get going, I'd like to just share with you just a quick story of how this might work in action. So I have a friend of mine, his name is Victor. So he's basically an entrepreneur who lives in Redmond, Washington. He's got a company that builds test equipment. He's the CEO of that company, and he does mobile apps in his spare time. So we were hanging out, and he was showing me one of his apps, and it's basically a mobile app for a national park. And so he's telling me he thought the app was fantastic. He's like, well, it's a fantastic app. It's really going well. I'm really liking how it's working out, but I'm not really sure what to put on the home screen. You know, should it be like a home page, or should it be like a menu, or should it be a map? I'm not really sure what to put on the home screen. Now, I would imagine most people in that position would start to sketch stuff. We'd kind of like brainstorm a little bit and sketch and try to explore what we might do there. We didn't do that. Oops. So, wrong button. What we did instead was we had a personal conversation. So what I said to him is, okay, tell me a little bit about this national park, and I want to know who's going there and what exactly your app's going to be doing for those people. So we had that conversation, and then when he's done, I said, okay, let's stop. Let's forget everything. Let's just have a human conversation. I'm that person that's your target user, so talk to me. What are we talking about? I'm thinking about going to this national park. What are we going to be talking about? What's important to me? What do I need to know? And so I was listening to what he was telling me, and I was noticing 3 very strong themes. First one is exploration, that if you're not really familiar with the park, you want to explore it, see what activities there are, what you might want to do there, why you might want to go. The next theme was more planning. It's like, okay, once you've identified some things you'd like to do there, start to plan a trip, to figure out where to go, what your schedule might be, what you need to bring. And then finally, it's actually doing. If you're actually at the park, wanting maps and whatnot that's relevant to the location, the context in which you're in. So my response to him is, well, what we just talked about, that's your home screen. That's the experience you want to do. We want to elevate the content that people care about and make an experience based on that. So what that might be is initially we have just exploration. As you navigate through and you look at things or you mark things as favorites, those would be surfaced. And once you're physically at the park, maybe you have a map. And if you're at a specific place, it would give you the map and information for that specific place. That should be that user experience. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. But what we want is a home screen that's going to support that experience. Now we can brainstorm and sketch because now we know what to do. So what just happened here? Well, I want to point out that we focused on the target users and their goals, and we figured out what a good human experience would be. And we also elevated the content that people care about. That's a very important design principle for mobile apps. But I want to point out what we didn't do. We didn't talk about technology. We didn't talk about features. We didn't talk about patterns or task flows or requirements or anything like that. We completely ignored the technology. We focused on the human experience. Of course, we still need to brainstorm. We still need to sketch. We still need to do those design activities that we traditionally do, but the difference is now we have an idea of what we need to focus on. We have a direction to go in as opposed to doing this kind of randomly. And as a result, I think we saved a whole lot of time. We know exactly what to do because we have confidence in what a good human experience would be. All right, at this point I want to talk a little bit about sketching. And the title for this talk is Beyond Sketching, so that's kind of provocative. So that's kind of suggesting there's a problem here. All right, so my resource for this is Bill Buxton's book, Sketching User Experiences. Has anyone seen this book by any chance? All right, a few people. All right, so just to kind of quickly summarize the key points that he talks about. So first of all, to contrast sketching from prototyping, sketching is a way to express ideas during the activity of ideation. We're trying to figure out what to do. That's what sketching is all about, suggesting and exploring design directions. That's what sketching is for. By contrast, prototyping is different. Prototyping is all about taking an established idea and working through the details. That's prototyping. So sketching, we come up with the ideas in the first place. Prototyping, we figure out specifically how to do it. The key insight here is that these are different activities with different goals. They kind of look the same. They kind of, from a distance, a casual observer might not realize they're different, but they are different. They're different activities with different goals. So here are some of the attributes that Buxton talks about for effective sketching. I'm sure you're familiar with this, so I won't go into these in too much detail, but of course they're quick, they're timely, they're inexpensive, they're disposable, we can throw them away, nobody's going to care, we can crank out a whole lot of these very, very quickly. There's minimal detail. But the one surprise here is ambiguity. Buxton points out that sketches are ambiguous, and he says that's a good thing. Right? Because I can put a sketch up and I can kind of show what I'm thinking. Everybody can have a slightly different interpretation of that sketch. And that's actually a great thing because your interpretation is likely to be better than my original idea. So the idea that he's suggesting here is that sketches are ambiguous. We should embrace that because that's an important part of the ideation process. Of course, we have the natural ability to sketch, so I don't really worry about that too much. But just to try to visualize the process, we start a project, we start basically with nothing, so that's our starting point. Over time, we want to ideate, come up with more and more ideas. At some point, we want to narrow those down and kind of refine them down to the winner. So this is known as Losso's funnel. And so in the beginning part of this, it's more of a sketching type activity. As we've developed our ideas and we want to really flesh them out and figure out specifically what to do, that's more of a prototyping activity. All right, so I'm calling this Beyond Sketching Features. So that word beyond is kind of provocative. It's kind of suggesting I think there's a problem here. So what's the problem? What problem could we have here? Sketching, after all, is a fantastic thing. It's kind of the heart of what we do as designers is we sketch stuff to start the process. So what could possibly be wrong? Well, it's a great tool for sketching or for suggesting and exploring, but my question is, suggesting and exploring what? When we sketch, what do we sketch typically? And my observation is that what we tend to sketch kind of boils down to these three things. We focus on layout, we focus on basic interaction and task flow, and we focus on basic visualization, basic visual design. And of course, these are all fine things. We have to do these things. But I think there are more important things we need to do, right? So things like user goals and delivering value and thinking about the most important scenarios and, of course, making things simple and intuitive. Where does that show up in the process? We're really kind of focused on more of the mechanical things, the physical things, as opposed to these higher level goals. So my question is this really the best tool to drive the design process? And I think we can do better. And I want to demonstrate to you why that might be the case. And so one thing I want to do first, though, is just kind of make the case that these observations I've made, that sketches are usually layout, basic interaction, basic navigation, and basic visual appearance. I want to give you some examples to kind of make that point here. So when I was searching for examples of this, I was a little worried about this because I was kind of afraid that people might accuse me of choosing bad sketches. But I was very relieved to find when I did the search that there's a lot of sites that say things like 18 examples, great examples of sketching and whatnot. So I want to look at 40 brilliant examples of sketched UI wireframes, just to kind of explore what I'm looking for. And here's the specific URL that I'm referring to. So I just want to quickly look at a variety of sketches. And I just want you to tell me what you see here. All right, what is this sketch exploring? What do you see? It's layout, right? So it's basically layout and basic visual appearance. Is this a good UI? How do we know, right? We have no idea if this is any good or not, but we kind of know what it's going to look like based on the sketch, right? So it's layout, appearance. How about these? What are we exploring here? Right, so we got a variety of different possible layouts, a variety of different possible visual appearances. Are these good designs? How do we choose the right one? Is this going to be a great user experience? Not really sure. How about this? What are we sketching here? So audience participation is going to be crucial to this talk, so we've got to get used to this. So what are we sketching here? Do we? Maybe there's it looks kind of like a framework, maybe, so like a template for something. Is there a task flow in there? I see more of like how the widgets might look, but I don't really see much beyond that. So it's basically appearance, kind of like what our design vocabulary is going to look like. How about this? Same stuff, right? So we got layout, we've got some basic interaction, we've got some basic navigation. We kind of get a rough idea what it's going to look like. How about this one? All right, this one's a trick question. This is not a sketch. It's a what? This is a prototype, right? So this one is a lot more detailed than a good sketch would be because it's just going well beyond what an exploration would be. This is more of taking an established idea and working it through. I'd call this a sketch, not a wireframe. I got that backwards. I'd call this a wireframe, not a sketch. All right, so what I typically see is what it's going to look like, what users are going to do in terms of the basic interaction, how they get to the next step. These alone, for me, constitute mechanical usability. I like to use that phrase. Mechanically, it tells us how we're going to do the task. But I just want to point out that if we were to look at UI design in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, mechanical usability is the bottom. This is like the most basic thing. It doesn't really make a great user experience. It makes an acceptable user experience. And I really want to get beyond that. So, to summarize, I think sketching is great. Of course we need to sketch. It's an important part of the design process. But the things we tend to sketch are really basic things that allow us to achieve mechanical usability so that we can make things functionally work. Those higher level things, like satisfying users' goals and the top scenarios and delivering value, those things get addressed later if they get addressed at all. And I really think we need to do better than that. I think those things should be addressed deliberately rather than accidentally. And I'd rather have a process that goes out of its way to accomplish that. So very often I see sketching being kind of random without a clear direction. So the question is, can we do better? Can we actually achieve these high-level, important goals deliberately rather than accidentally? And I believe the answer to that question is yes, and I believe thinking about human communication is the way to do that. So I want to make sure that we sketch with a clear purpose. We're not just doing random sketches. We actually try to figure out what we're trying to accomplish here. All right, so I want to explore this idea about UI being a form of human communication. UI as a conversation. Did anyone attend my talk last night at the meetup by any chance? So few people. All right, so for you, this part will be review, but the good news is the ending will be completely different. So it'll be better the second time around. So I want to explore this a little bit. So my claim is that UI design, a UI is an objective, principled form of human communication, not a subjective art. I think we need to take some of the art out of the design process and really focus more on how to communicate effectively to people. So in order to illustrate this, I'd like to work through a hypothetical situation. I'm going to have audience participation because I'm going to ask you a few questions about this. But I want to set up a hypothetical situation where we've got a team working on a new project, and we recognize that having a great user experience is essential to the success of this new project. So we have to do a great job with this. I don't know why that wasn't the case before, but this time we got to nail it. Unfortunately, we don't have any UX design professionals on our team. We've got developers, we've got testers, we've got managers, we've got business analysts, but nobody with UX design experience. But fortunately, we've got Bob and Alice, who are our best developers. We could put Bob and Alice in charge of the UI design. And Bob and Alice appear to have done a great job. They've kind of done all the things we'd expect them to do. Talk to us, they've talked to the customers, they talked to stakeholders. You know, they put themselves in a large conference rooms with whiteboards, and they've done a lot of drawing and sketching and prototyping, and they've done creative things with sticky notes. They're using fancy words like user empathy and skeuomorphism. So we're very, very impressed by what they're doing, but we haven't seen their design at all. In fact, we're about to see it now for the first time. So Bob and Alice are presenting their design to us for the very first time. I've got 2 questions based on this hypothetical setup. First question, how good do you think the design is going to be? Second question, how well do you think the meeting's going to go? What do you think? Good design? Kind of hard to read, but I've heard the word bad several times, so is that kind of... Now, the way I set it up, though, is that Bob and Alice are really trying hard to do the right thing here, right? They're really trying to do the right thing, but you don't think they'll be successful? No? Okay. What about the meeting? Of course, this is hypothetical, no right or wrong answer, but just based on your experience, any thoughts about the meeting?
It'll go well.
Pardon? Okay. People like it? They'll love it? Okay. Okay, very good. All right, so here's my expectation. So first of all, I don't think that design will be very good. Even though Bob and Alice are really trying hard to do a great job here, they don't have the experience, so they're going to make the classic mistakes that everybody makes. They're probably going to design for themselves. They're probably going to look at one design solution. They're probably going to focus on the features and the technology, even though they're trying really, really hard not to. They probably will anyway. And probably their screens will be very complex, confusing, non-standard, and typically, as most developers, they'll try to cram everything onto a single screen. That's just what developers do. On the other hand, though, I think their explanation in the meeting will be excellent. Now, who knows exactly how the meeting will play out, but what I would expect is that when they put a screen up, we'll all kind of look at it and go, ooh, you know, what's that? And then they'll explain it to us, and we'll go, oh, okay, now that they've explained it, I get it. I understand what they're trying to do, right? You've probably been in that situation before, right? So why does this happen? When we're designing, we're focused on the technology and the features. We're trying to focus on enabling the task mechanically. Whereas by contrast, when we're explaining things in person, we're focused on the person and their goals, and we're explaining the task in terms that they understand. So that really makes a big difference. We explain it much better than we design it. Another thing I would like you to do when you're thinking about designing a product is imagine a conversation where someone's sitting down trying to use your product, and they kind of casually turn to you and ask you what it is they're supposed to do. And I want you to think about the response you'd give, the steps you'd give, the order, the language you'd use. Also think about the things you wouldn't say because you know the person just doesn't care. And I think at a very high level, that's what our designs ought to look like. This kind of natural, friendly conversation, the way we communicate in person, works much better than the way we communicate usually through technology. So again, user interface is essentially a form of human communication, and the way in which we communicate in person is much better. So when we're explaining something in person and it doesn't make sense or it's confusing or hard to understand, we fix it in that explanation. We kind of immediately recognize it and fix it. When we explain it, that's something I want to leverage here. And so if our personal explanation is different, that's telling us we have some design problems. All right, so let's work through a few examples just to give this a quick go. So I've got a couple techniques I'd like to try to illustrate how we can take advantage of human communication, human conversations to make our designs better. So the first question I want to, or the first technique I like to use is just ask the question, is this what we would say in person? I like to ask this question all the time. I'm looking at a design, just ask the person, you know, what would you say in person? So let's give this a go. So that is, we're going to look at what's on the screen, we're going to think about what we'd say in person, look for differences. And if we see differences, that's telling us we have problems with our design. And I just want to point out this is so simple. It's just a simple technique, but it's amazing how much insight we can get from this. All right, so in order to get this going, first example I'd like to look at is from Adobe Photoshop. So I'm installing Adobe Photoshop Elements 8.0, and this is the setup screen that does the actual bit transfer. So I don't know if this is legible in the back, but I'll just read it to you verbatim what's on the screen. And my question for you while I'm reading this is this what we'd say in person? So let's try to figure this out. Is it communicating well? Is it what we'd say in person? So it says, Adobe Photoshop Elements 8.0 setup. Installing Adobe Photoshop Elements 8.0. The program features you selected are being installed. Please wait while the Install Shield wizard installs Adobe Photoshop Elements 8.0. This may take several minutes. Status, copying new files, progress bar. All right, is that what we say in person? Anybody, can you imagine any human? So that scenario I talked about, somebody casually turns to you and says, what's going on here? Could you imagine any human saying that to some other human as a response? Right? It's not going to happen, is it? So what would we say in person? Now, there's basically two scenarios here when we're installing something, right? There's the quick scenario where it takes a moment or two, so we just wait until it installs, right? So if we have like a mobile app on our smartphone, it's only going to take a few seconds. So what do we communicate there for that? What do we really care about? It's just the progress bar, right? That's all we need to know. So the progress bar alone is sufficient communication. Now let's say we have something more sophisticated like Adobe Photoshop Elements 8.0, something that takes a long time to install. What do we say in person there? So it might take, what, 15, 20, half hour, something like that. What would we say? Please be patient, okay.
Do something else.
Time remaining. Very good, what else?
Grab a cup of coffee.
So we don't know, or the user doesn't know. But so a robot might say that, but I think a human would actually try to give the other person a clue what they should do while waiting, right? So if it's going to take 20 minutes, you're going to say, hopefully you're not going to say it's going to take, we don't know how long it's going to take. You could say something else, right? So, yes? Exactly. So a person might actually say something like, please wait, or better yet, feel free to get a cup of coffee. I mean, that's what we'd say in person, right? Something like that. You know, it's not about the coffee, but what it is about is the human conversation. This is something we'd actually say. We give the person an idea. Hey, don't sit here and wait for this. Go do something else. That's the human conversation. That's the right UI. This crap that we put on the screens, nobody cares about this. This is not important. Nobody reads this stuff, right? Let's look at another example. So this is from a website where I'm buying a product online, and doing the checkout process, and they're asking me for my daytime phone number, which I didn't provide because it didn't really seem necessary for the task at hand. And so they slap me with this error message. So again, in case you can't read it in the back, I'll just read it to you. But my question to you is, you know, does this communicate well? What would we actually say in person? So it says, error. Please correct the following error. Daytime phone number. That the above field is required. Please correct the highlighted field below before proceeding. Would any humans say that to any other human in this particular situation? No, right? What would we say? At least what I'd say is, of course, there's many ways we could phrase this, but I'd say something like, please provide your daytime phone number, right? Now, notice that I didn't give this phone number for a reason. The reason is it didn't seem necessary for the task at hand. In a human conversation, if someone were reluctant to give us information, what would we say? Why you need it, exactly. So, please provide your daytime phone number in case there's a problem with your order. That's the human conversation. That's what should be here. All right, I want to give you another technique. So the other technique I like to use all the time, several, but these are my two favorites. to ask the question, what is the purpose of this page? So I'm trying to evaluate a page. I simply like to ask the question, what is the purpose of this page? I like to come up with what I call a main instruction that explains what the purpose of the page is, and then evaluate the page based on that instruction. And furthermore, if that instruction isn't obvious, it doesn't go without saying, actually put the instruction on the page. That's the process. It's very, very simple. It's remarkable how much insight it gives us. So this is just so simple. I really want to encourage you to try to do this sort of thing. All right, so let's give this a go. So this is a program called wget GUI, and I'm going to just ask you a couple questions. Don't say the answer out loud. I just want you to try to figure this out on your own. So if you're not familiar with what wget does, first question I have for you is just, what does this program do? And don't say it out loud, but just try to figure it out. Can you look at it, try to figure out what this program does? My second question is, suppose you were responsible for redesigning this. What would be a reasonable amount of time to redesign this? Again, you don't have to say it out loud. All right, very good. So I want to show you my redesign of this particular UI, and I want to ask the same question. So again, what is the purpose of this program? Okay, fantastic. How are you able to figure it out so quickly? That's remarkable. Right, so now we know what the purpose of the program is. Why? Because it tells us. Isn't it kind of bizarre that we have UIs that don't even tell us what they're for? We have to kind of like puzzle it out, right? So that's kind of crazy. Let's actually explain what we're supposed to do. Next question I asked was, how long would it take to redesign this? So if we were to start with this and apply the traditional user-centered design process, so we get together as a multidisciplinary team and we brainstorm and we come up with sketches and then we prototype something and we give a mock-up, maybe an MVP to our customer, and we get feedback and we analyze that feedback and we make a set of recommended changes and we do another iteration and we give that another go and then we give it another go, and in this case we probably need 3 or 4 at least to get something good. That takes a long time. That doesn't take hours. That takes days or weeks or possibly even months, even for something simple like that, simply because the turnaround time is so long. It just takes a long time to apply that process. So I timed myself when I did this. I spent 15 minutes on this, 10 of which were spent groveling through the user's manual, trying to figure out what the heck this program did, because I didn't know. It took me 10 minutes to figure out this main instruction. Once I figured out the main instruction, I'm like, oh, this is just a copy dialog. I know how to design that. That's pretty straightforward. The rest of it was trivial. The only real thing to figure out is which options are important enough to surface those at the top level, because they're going to be changed frequently enough to make that worthwhile. That's really the only hard design challenge here. But notice how much insight just asking this question gave. It's like a human conversation. Tell me what the conversation is. I can design the UI for you. Another example I like is this one here. So, I'll just quickly tell you what it's all about. Then I'm going to ask you a couple questions again. So this is a dashboard for a product that is used by volunteer fundraisers to raise funds for their charitable organization. And so I have 2 questions for you. First question is, what do you think? Again, don't have to say it out loud, but just to assess it. Do you think this is a good design, well designed, not so much, somewhere in between? What do you think? And my second question is, what did you make that assessment on? What were you looking for when you evaluated this design? Again, you don't have to say it out loud. All right, so I'm working with the entrepreneur who created this, and I said, well, let's just come up with a good main instruction for this. And he said, okay, how about dashboard? It's a dashboard. By the way, I should have mentioned one thing. I do have a thing about dashboards. The thing I have about dashboards is that they're usually a big pile of stuff. But the fact that they're a configurable pile of stuff kind of makes it okay with everybody, but it's really not okay with me. I think we need to do a better job here. So he says, all right, what about dashboard? And I'm like, well, that doesn't really tell me anything. What are people doing here on this dashboard? He said, well, anything they want, it's a dashboard. And then I said, well, okay, that doesn't really sound good. What are people likely to be doing here? And he said, well, I don't know. It's a configurable dashboard. So we're kind of going around and around, and he says, okay, fine. There's really 2 things the target users care about here. The first thing is the volunteer fundraisers. They're evaluated by meeting their monthly quota. They want to make sure they're on track for meeting their monthly quota. The other thing is they need to keep track of donors that require follow-up. Very often when you're raising funds, you call somebody will say, I can't help you now, but get back to me next Monday. So they need to keep track of those guys and follow up with them. So going back to my question, So my bet is you probably don't like it as much now as you did a couple minutes ago, right? Is that fair? And the second question is, what did you evaluate your conclusion on? And my bet is you probably based it on its visual appearance, right? It looks nice, looks orderly, it looks well designed. It's appealing to the eye. We weren't really looking at it from the user's point of view. We were looking at it from the visual point of view, weren't we? Right? All right, one more. So this one is from Citrix. So Citrix does a lot of virtual machine configuration stuff. So this is a wizard that enables you to configure a virtual machine. And so we're on step 3. In step 2, what we're doing is choosing the templates. So in this case, let's say we chose an Exchange server template just to get going here. So in step 3, we have to choose the hardware configuration. Again, I'll ask you the question, what do you think? Good design? So I want to come up with a kind of a main instruction to explain what this page is all about. So I'm saying to them, okay, you know, what am I supposed to do here? What is the purpose of this page? And of course, you have to choose the hardware configuration. But my question is, how do you do that? They're like, well, the target user is going to know. I'm like, no, that can't be the case. How do I know specifically how to choose the right hardware configuration here? Could I choose any random one? Could I choose like small instance here? And they're like, no, 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 of course you wouldn't do that. You have to choose a configuration that will support your configuration, right? So I'm like, okay, why don't we choose, let's say something like extra large instance or desktop heavy. That sounds good. That'll certainly support my application. They're like, no, 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 of course you wouldn't do that. You need to choose a configuration that will support your application that is the most cost effective. You want the most cost effective configuration to support your application here. All right, so that would be an excellent main instruction. We're not going to put it on the page, but that's the purpose of this page. This is what we're doing here. Again, what do you think of the design now? It's not very good, is it? Right? Where's the information that's going to help me figure out which one of these server configurations supports my application? Where's the information that's going to help me figure out which one's the most cost effective? The information that's required to make an informed decision is completely missing. And once we ask that question, what is it we're trying to do here? We have this human conversation, we immediately can identify what the problems are. We just look at the visual appearance, the layout, the features, that doesn't tell us anything. So Albert Einstein has a great quote. He said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended upon it, I would use the first 55 minutes to determine the proper question to ask. For once I knew the proper question, I would solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. And that's what I'm doing here. That's what this technique is. Let's figure out what that proper question is. It's going to tell us how to design our UIs. So effective communication gives us insight. Let's think about effective communication. Instead of the requirements, the layout, mechanical usability, that doesn't give us any insight at all. That doesn't tell us anything. We need to get beyond that. In fact, I'm going to make a provocative claim here. So how am I doing? 5 minutes? Doing all right. So Phil made the claim today earlier when he's talking about lean. He was saying that lean is kind of necessary. No, he's talking about agile. Actually, agile is necessary because waterfall doesn't work. Waterfall has failed. I would make the argument that we need agile not because waterfall has failed, but because feature-based design has failed. We just don't know what to do based on feature-based design. We just kind of crank out this stuff people don't want. All right, so my question is, how much insight could we get if we were just focusing on the layout, the navigation, et cetera, from those previous examples? I don't think it's going to get us anywhere. All right, so I just want to put everything together, and I just want to give you quickly a communication-focused process. So this is from the Apple iOS guidelines on how to design a good mobile app. So they tell us to list the features that you think users might like, determine who your users are, filter it down based on your audience definition, don't stop there, and iterate, 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 right? So that's what I call sketching a pile of features. A lot of teams do this. We just sketch, we figure out what our features are and just try to figure out how they're going to fit on the screen. So I call this sketching a pile of features. The interesting thing I've learned being a design trainer and consultant for the last 5 years, first of all, the most interesting thing is how poorly feature-based design works. I see this over and over again. It just does not work well. The other thing I've noticed is how almost everybody's doing feature-based design. Pretty much every team I work with is doing some variation on this process. So I just wanted to have like a little cartoon to illustrate what this looks like. So of course what we do is we start off with user research and we kind of organize our research and maybe do creative things with sticky notes. And eventually we start sketching stuff. And then of course a miracle happens and then we end up with an amazing 5-star app. But I'm a little bit worried about this miracle part. You know, it just seems like we're depending too much on this process to get us where we want to be here. So how does this miracle happen? Well, we do it in a variety of ways, maybe variations of layout, flows, controls, etc. Of course, we've got multidisciplinary collaboration, so we've got the entire team involved, and so that's going to help us get a lot of input here. We've got user testing, user feedback with an MVP perhaps, and of course lots and lots and lots of iteration. Quite frankly though, schedules, budgets, and platform limitations for most of the teams I work with, quite frankly, that determines more than anything else. So I just want to look at kind of a standard process that we use for sketching, and this is coming from Sketching User Experiences. This is the workbook that goes with Buxton's book. And to just explore this quickly, I don't want to really disrespect anybody's process. So if you're doing something like this and it works great for you, of course, that's wonderful. But my challenge for you here today is, can we do it better? Can we do what we're doing better? So let's just look at this. So the process they recommend in the sketching workbook is what they call 10+10. It's called Design Studio and other places, and Crazy 8s as well. So 10+10, the idea is we're going to come up with 10 completely different ideas, and we're going to basically come up with 10 variations of our best idea. That's 10+10. Crazy 8 is we take a sheet of paper, we break it up into 8 panes, and we quickly come up with 8 different design ideas in 10 minutes. So that's Crazy 8s. So to just kind of visualize how this looks is that we've got our kind of our vast space of design possibilities, and the idea is we're basically carpet bombing this space with a variety of different design possibilities, and hopefully discovering, kind of by accident, what the best ones are, and kind of iterating ourselves up to these peaks here. So that's kind of the thought behind this process here. We kind of want to discover these best things through these kind of random design ideas that we come up with. I do think, though, that this illustration is a bit generous because it makes it look like we're kind of very probable to hit one of these peaks here. I think in most situations what we really have is kind of like a vast sea of mediocrity with an occasional island here and there of greatness. And so hitting these things with kind of random bombs is not really going to be that likely. So my question is, what happens if the miracle doesn't happen, right? We try to go through this process and we really don't come up with good ideas. What happens then? You know, and doesn't this process feel kind of random and kind of accidental and mechanical? And you know, what if our initial ideas just aren't that good? We're just going to have the best bad idea, aren't we? So I want a process that's more repeatable, more purposeful, and more human. So to kind of skip ahead here, so this is what I want. This is the process that I recommend using. So first of all, what I want to do is have our scenarios drive the process. I don't have the time to talk about scenario-based design, but I'm a huge believer in scenario-based design. I really think it gives us tremendous insight. So let's figure out what our top scenarios are, the things our users really do care about. We take our top scenarios, we figure out how to communicate the tasks in those scenarios on a human level. What does that human experience feel like? Then based on that, let's come up with an intuitive task flow by breaking it down into easily explainable steps, as we talked about previously. Once we've got that done, now we can start to sketch the pages. Now we can do that productively and, of course, iterate to get it right. I want to point out that the traditional process pretty much starts on step 4. We kind of skip those first 3 steps, and I think we're missing a lot when we do that. So what I want to do to evaluate is I want to ask the purpose of the page, make sure we're satisfying the user's goals, making sure that we're communicating on a human level very, very effectively, and also even ask if we need that step in the first place. I think that's a very important question we often overlook. Secondary things like layout, interaction, task flows, not that important. I mean, yes, of course, we have to do that, but these are not the most important things. These are kind of secondary factors. All right, one last thought here. Alan Cooper talks about pretendance magic. So if you've been to one of Cooper's workshops, so I hear one technique they like to use is they like to say, well, let's pretend it's magic. And I like that because it kind of gets us beyond the technology. We're not thinking about the technology, we're not thinking about the features, we're just thinking about what a great user experience would be. However, if you're a practical person, I consider myself to be a practical person, if you're a practical person and you recognize that a solution requires magic, that's really not that satisfying. So my question is, what would a magical experience be like where we kind of limit our thinking to things that we can actually do? And I'm thinking, wouldn't that be something that feels like a good human experience that's fully enhanced through technology? I think that's what it is. I think that's practical magic. That's what we want to do here, is kind of come up with that great human experience and see how we can take full advantage of technology to make that as good as possible. All right, so let's wrap this up. So again, I want to stress that I think sketching is great. It's fantastic. I don't want to suggest that there's anything necessarily wrong with sketching, but I want to make sure that we sketch great human experiences, not so much the mechanical usability. I think we need to get beyond that. Human interfaces, or user interfaces rather, are basically a form of human communication. So if we think about effective human communication, that's going to give us a whole lot more insight than just thinking about layout features and task flows. To get beyond the mechanical usability, thinking about scenarios, thinking about effective human communication is going to get us to where we want to be. And above and beyond, what I want to do is I want to sketch with a purpose. I want to not be so dependent upon the miracle in the design process. So here's my contact information. If you got any feedback, I'd love to hear it. I've got business cards up front if you'd like to get those. And I'd certainly like to connect on Twitter and on LinkedIn. All right, that's all I've got. Thank you very much.